You are listening to the Archaeology Podcast Network.
Hello and welcome to the Archaeotech Podcast, episode 32. I'm your host, Chris Webster, with my co-host, Chris Sims. On today's show, we talked to Meghan Dennis and her students from the University of York about the Digital Archaeology and Heritage Field School. We'll talk about their recent project and their experiences. Let's get to it. All right, welcome to the show, everyone. Chris, welcome to the show as well. I just found out in the pre-show that you're actually in Pittsburgh this time, again on the road.
Always.
Nice. All right, now let's get right to the show. So I'm going to introduce first. We've got a lot of people as guests on the show today, and we'll get to exactly what this is going to be about shortly. But Meghan, why don't you introduce yourself and then who you've got in the room, and then we'll move around Skype.
Absolutely. My name is Meghan Dennis. I'm a first-year PhD student at the University of York in York, England, studying archaeology, ethics, and video games. And I have been working under Sarah Perry with the Archaeology and Heritage Digital Field School. And the three students that we have here have all participated in that field school. So I'm going to let them introduce themselves.
Okay.
I'm Ashley Fisher. I'm one of the students.
I'm Emmeline Batchelor. And we have Eliza.
Yeah, I'm Eliza Dorosh. I'm an international student.
Okay, so does one of you want to tell us first? Actually, Meghan, why don't you start by telling us exactly what the field school is, and then the students can get into what they did for that field school. Because the field school I put in the introduction that we recorded earlier called the Digital Archaeology and Heritage Field School. Why don't you tell us a little about that?
Sure. We have two field schools that go on during summer term at York. We have one that is the traditional excavation field school, which was divided between two sites this year. Mm-hmm. And then on top of that, we have a cohort of students who work in heritage. And then that's a cat. Sorry. We have cats and dogs running around here.
Nice.
So we have the heritage section, and these students look at digital projects. They look at how to integrate digital technologies into heritage practice, and they look at some stuff to do with museums, some stuff to do with national programs, some stuff to do with how the process of heritage management works. And throughout their time, which is paralleling the excavation field school, they put together a series of products related to the excavation sites. And then the excavation teams work under the heritage students to put together an exhibition showing everything that took place during the field season.
Okay, excellent. So let's get into what the students actually did, if one of you guys wants to talk about that.
Okay, so the main thing that the project was about was creating an audio guide for a site in the Dales called Brewery Banks. Now, Brewery Banks is actually quite interesting because when you first get there, you can't really see anything if you've got an untrained eye. But actually, with the archaeological training that we got on the first day, you can make out terracing in one of the fields, which actually was remains of huts that was built there in the early 19th century. Mm-hmm. And basically what we had to do as part of a collaborative project between the University of York and the Nidderdale area was to make an audio guide detailing the lives of the people living there at the site. What can I say about the history? Basically, Brewery Banks is it's a World War I site. And before that, it was also a navigator site. Sorry. Basically,
that was the dog.
Yeah.
Basically, in the early 19th century, there was a lot of building. Yes, it is actually. It's the early 20th century. Thank you very much. It's 20th century. God. In the early 20th century, we had a lot of construction work going on in the north of England. And Brewery Banks was a site where we were going to build reservoirs.
Okay.
That would link up the majority of the northern towns, mainly Leeds, which is also part of a collaboration with the University of York. And what the navigators had to do was to build reservoirs in that site. With the archaeological excavations that were happening there, they found that the navigators were actually building at Leighton, and it was a town that was purposely built for the people who were living there. And our audio guide is basically bringing alive the lives of these people in that site, which had mainly been forgotten. And it's a bit of history which isn't very well known, and we hope that our audio guide would kind of like bring it to life and make more people want to listen to it. We then focused on World War One because Leeds, who kind of owned that site, sent their army trainees to go up there. Because it was a site where they could like learn how to build trenches, they could learn how to survive in a rough environment and kind of get very cold when it was very windy, and learn how it wasn't easy to live there. And because the 100th anniversary of the Battle of the Somme is coming up this year, our audio guide was also to kind of work as a commemorative approach of the people who trained there.
Mm-hmm.
And again, with our audio guide, we've kind of tried to bring the stories alive. Ashley, Eliza, and Jesh, another one of our cohorts, did a lot of research on this. We found a lot of stories in a newspaper archive. We had one of our other team members, Steve, grew up in the area, and so he was able to give us a lot of personal stories. And so we put all of that into our audio guide. And then following the excavations this year, we kind of finalised it with the fact that it kind of came back to a navigator site, and then it got sold off. So like I said before, you can't really see anything there. And it was, yes.
So how did you make the audio guide? I mean, you mentioned some possible interviews and things like that. Is it all interviews with people, or what's the...
No.
Okay.
We wrote basically a story.
Okay.
So what we did with the research that we had done, we tried to bring the people alive. So we have a narrator kind of explaining people where they have to go and how, and also giving it a bit of background. And then we have people giving voices to the research that we did. So for example, in one of our stops, we have Steve voicing the voice of a Navy worker, and then another stop we have a child talking about how children were living at the site, and then we finish it off with a nurse who could potentially have been working at the site during the time it was a World War One site. Mm-hmm. And we wanted to focus on the emotional trajectory. Because there was so much emotion that was coming in through our research, we kind of got the idea that navigators are basically men working together in construction, so they'd be kind of joyful, but hardworking, a bit...
a good CRM crew.
Yeah,
exactly.
And then we had the army trainees who were kind of really excited to get to war, kind of to do their bit for king and country. And then we finished it off with kind of like the sadness of people who died during the Battle of the Somme, kind of people who wanted the war to finish. And then we kind of rounded it off with like hope that the site would continue living. And we mainly focused on the emotional trajectory because it's a very hard site to work with.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
that was one of the main emphasis of our entire project, that we brought the personal stories to life rather than
Mm-hmm.
just listing off a bunch of dry facts. And that's one of the reasons that we sort of structured it as a story that went through the life of the camp and the life of the site as well.
Well, that's good. That's one reason we do the podcast and the entire Archaeology Podcast Network, is because archaeology can be a lot of dry facts, and we try to make it accessible. Yeah. So it's nice that you did that. How long is this audio guide, and what's the format? Like, how do you get access to it?
Right. The audio guide is about 40 minutes long.
Okay.
We didn't want the stops to go longer than 3 minutes because we kind of shut off after a while. Listening to my voice, it's a bit annoying sometimes. And the format, we want to put it on SoundCloud at first, and we were going to embed the SoundCloud tracks onto our blog in WordPress. But at the moment, we're kind of unsure about how to make it deliverable, and that was one thing that we needed to talk about. And if you guys have any ideas about how we could do that, it would be really very appreciated.
They're looking at potentially using podcast formats via Apple or other distribution channels as well. And that's one of the final decisions that we have to make, is what is the actual best way to make this something that people can access at home on their computers, but also can access and take with them, because the site has very, very poor wireless coverage.
Yeah.
Well,
As I'm sure you're familiar with, sometimes these places can have. So figuring out the best format, that's realistically the last thing that has to be done right now.
Okay.
And a discussion of formats that's a big discussion.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Well, I have a question about, so you said that the audio track is about 40 minutes long. How did you decide on the pacing of that? Did you kind of space it out on like an average walking time through the site?
Oh, we did.
We spent a great deal of time on that, actually.
Sounds like it.
that day was hailing, I believe.
It was
hailed
hailing,
for 6 hours.
It was snowing. It was windy. There could have been a blizzard at one point.
Yeah.
Nice.
And Megan had never been to the site before, so she was our test subject. We basically we'd been there before, so we had a rough idea about what we wanted to do.
Before, when the weather was absolutely beautiful and gorgeous.
Yeah. And then we took Megan up with a dictaphone and a timer, and we timed how long Megan, walking quite slowly, would get to the individual stops. And then we would like say things and like talk about what we wanted to talk about and put into the stop until Megan got cold or got bored and wanted to move on. And that's how we timed our bit of the project. But we also timed 40 minutes based on previous work that Sarah Perry had done on other audio guides, and she estimated that 40 minutes in a site as exposed as Bury Banks, where the weather could change at any point, would be ideal for some of these people, for our main audience.
Yeah.
Okay.
Nice.
Well, I will tell you one thing, and we could talk about this offline, but one thing the Archaeology Podcast Network that we're talking about doing, and I'll be doing a little bit this summer, is putting up pages for single short run series types episodes that aren't like ongoing podcasts. And this would be kind of a perfect thing for that. We could put up a whole page for it. It will go to iTunes, and then you can direct people to either the Archaeology Podcast Network page or to iTunes or wherever else it can go from there. It can go pretty much anywhere from there, and then you'd have a place to store it forever. Right there. Once it's on iTunes forever. It's kind of hard to get off of iTunes. So, that'd be one avenue.
Talk offline. I think you just made a number of students very excited.
Nice. Yeah, we'll definitely talk about that, because getting access to it on your device and on your computer, and being able to download it, you're right, that is a really crucial thing. And the only two ways to do that for the public would be to have an app, which would be expensive, or to just have it as a podcast, because any of the good podcast players out there for all smartphones, you can download the actual episode to your smartphone and listen to it offline. So, yeah. That's perfect.
Yeah, that's where I think where we might be leaning at this point.
And how many stations are there at the site for the different talking parts?
How many stops?
We've got 8 stops total.
Yeah.
Okay.
And it's in conjunction with a leaflet that we made to kind of complement the audio guide and answer any questions that can't really be answered by the narrative.
Okay.
So, our brochure was, like Emmeline said, it was meant to complement and supplement, and also to help people who wouldn't necessarily listen to the audio. We're also including the scripts on our blog site, where they'll be able to download the scripts as well as the audio for, hearing impaired, or for people who just don't like listening to things.
Which is not the audience for this podcast.
But but it was something that we kept accessibility in mind.
Okay.
especially on that site, which isn't terribly accessible.
So, Megan, have other students done this for other projects, or is this kind of a new thing this year?
We have had, this is the biggest cohort that we've had for this, for the Heritage and Digital Heritage Field School. How many of you guys were there? There were seven this year. In the past, there's been one or two, but this is sort of, we've hit critical mass this year with the number of people. So there have been smaller amounts of projects. There have been sort of proto projects for this one that didn't get as far. They had really good quality and really good research, but they didn't necessarily get as far in terms of their production. And it's the hope that though these sites are not necessarily reopening next year as excavations, the university will have field schools, and that we can continue to do this sort of project going forward with wherever the university places their excavation field school.
Okay. Do you have plans for any other sorts of digital media related to this or this project or future projects?
Yes. Yes. I can say that there are a number of endeavors going on. I can't say a ton about a lot of them because they're not, I'm the PhD student. I'm not the supervisor. So I can only say so much, but yeah, I do know that there are other plans to continue this sort of heritage work with students specifically to bridge the gap between heritage and archaeology, because these are two sectors that really need each other to continue and don't necessarily always work well together or play well together, or share data in the way that they should. So one of our goals at York is to make heritage and archaeology more intertwined in the minds of the new practitioners.
Yeah, that's really important, and I've said this on a number of podcasts before too. Part of our jobs as archaeologists is to tell the public about what we do and to present our research in a way that's accessible. And it's great that you guys are, because I'm sure there's reports generated and things like that from the other field school work, but having something that the public can see as a tangible result, especially for, publicly funded universities and things like that. It's good. It's really their work that's being done, and especially over in England and with such a recent, compared to other archaeology, such a recent project. I mean, there's probably descendant communities there that are really interested in what you guys have to say about that site.
Yeah. Very.
Yeah.
So you guys want to talk some, probably after the break, we can tell you a little bit about the ways that the students were engaged with other organizations, because there was a lot of communication with descendant communities, a lot of communication with local communities and other stakeholders in this. This was very much not a project where it was just the university students working by themselves in a vacuum. They had a lot of people involved, and a lot of people to satisfy. This was very much treated like an actual work project, actual work project, where they had people to answer to, which was, I think, good for them. So
okay, well that's good. Well, let's take a break real quick, and we'll come back and I've got another question related to that too, and we'll get back into this. All right, back in 30 seconds.
The CRM Archaeology podcast brings together a panel of cultural resource management professionals to discuss the issues that really matter to the profession. Find out about networking strategies, job hunting, graduate programs, and much more. We'll often feature interviews with college professors, CRM business owners, and experts as well. Check out the show on iTunes, Stitcher Radio, and at www.archaeologypodcastnetwork.com/CRM Arc Podcast. Let's get back to the show.
Okay, we're back, and we're going to continue this discussion and get dig a little deeper into your guys' process and how you guys went about this. So, Megan, if you want to start off, just telling us, a little about what you were mentioning before the break, about the process and getting this thing going.
initially, this came out of an HLF project, which is Heritage Lottery Fund, and they were working with a number of groups, but I'm going to let Ashley actually explain because there's a long list of them that were doing their own projects and basically shifted us and what we wanted to do into their projects and found ways that we could be helpful to them. And I think what was really, as someone who is not the student doing the project, but watching it and being involved in it, what was really great was to see the ways that it became a feedback loop, and that the larger organizations have actually taken away things from what the students did and incorporated it into bigger endeavors that they had. And things where initially they told us they didn't know that they were going to be able to use us for certain kinds of work. And now looking at what they're doing, the students' work has heavily influenced these final products for these large heritage projects. And that's great. Like, that's what you want to see. So Ashley, you want to talk a little bit about who all was involved in this?
Yeah, like Megan said, this was part of a bigger HLF project, the World War I project from the Nidderdale Area of Outstanding Natural Beauty. The person who was in charge of that was Amanda Walters, and she was the person who gave us our directives that we were supposed to make an audio guide for Brewery Banks and a brochure to go with it. And she was the one who gave us the most important feedback, really. But our audio guide is part of a larger set of deliverables, including a walking guide that's going on in the Nidderdale area, and they also have and we also were in contact with the Leeds Museums and Galleries, who is doing a World War I project right now all about the Leeds PALs, and the Leeds PALs trained in Brewery Banks. So there was a nice connection there. They have a group of volunteers who are putting together a webpage all about the lives of the different PALs. So Brewery Banks very much factors into what they were doing there.
Excellent. Have you presented this to anyone in the public yet? Has anybody heard this that's outside of your guys' group?
We did do a couple test pilots. I wasn't there for those days, so let the others talk about that.
Eliza was with me for the test pilots.
Yeah, so basically we just went to the site and asked some of the students who excavate took part in that. And their feedback was really helpful because we caught which mistake we made and which we have to, prepare them in better way. And it was like great. Actually, our weather was great, which was of that. And of course, one of the supervisor also took the part. So we didn't have just the opinion of the young students, but we have a broaden public, and also it's help us to decide what people want to hear. And we ask also about the feelings because, like we said before, we try to focus on the emotional part of this site. So we realized that we did it perfectly.
Okay.
And someone else who was also out with us, Steve, there were two walkers who were going around the walk that is for the 3 days, and he asked them if they so he read a bit of his script and they told us that it was actually quite interesting, and that the moment it got out, they'd really like to use it properly because it would have given them more information about the site. Also, in our feedback, we sent the audio guide out round to some members of the department here at York, and they also gave us feedback about what to do and whether or not they liked it. And we've also sent it to the Leeds curators who were working at the Leeds Museums and Galleries, because they were also important in helping us develop our idea further. And it all came back that they liked the emotional trajectory. They enjoyed the way that we managed to direct them in the landscape, which is very hard to do.
Yeah.
And they also kind of liked how, even if they like the fact that because we use a lot of stories and we don't necessarily direct them specifically at the landscape, that they would be able to go out to Brewery Banks, come back and listen to it then, and kind of invest themselves into people's lives and emotions as well.
Nice. Yeah, it's good to have some feedback on
One of
that.
the key things that she didn't mention that is very important is that the public exhibition that's going on, all the students from the excavation field school, as well as the students from the heritage field school, are doing things related to this exhibition, which is open to the public to show the artifacts, to show the site, to show what it's like to work on the site as a student, to really go through the entire process of the archaeology for the public, so that people can really get a sense of what this is like. And we have done this exhibition before in previous years, and it's a big public draw. You would be surprised the interesting and diverse crowd that decides to come to these things, and it's really fun because the students get to stand up with their displays, and everything is done digitally, and talk about their work and talk about their experiences, and the students from the heritage school get experience actually managing and curating and
really looking forward to that.
working with teams of excavators to get their vision out there. So it's a good public outreach, and it's a good bridge between the two sections of the department as well.
Yeah, it also sounds like it's a really great professional development tool for the students involved as well.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, for us particularly, we're learning curation skills, which I think other people won't be able to stand up and say, I have learned to curate an exhibition. It's very daunting at first, but we're kind of getting quite excited, and people are coming up to me and asking me, when can I go? I have time, I'm going to come and see it. And quite a lot of my friends back at home are kind of like, they're kind of asking me, can we come to this? Is it open to us? Which is kind of cool and exciting as well, because they're actually getting interested about what we're doing. And they get even more excited when we say things like, it's not just posters, you're going to have to interact, you're going to have to kind of one of the panels is they've made a film trailer about a tablet that they found on the other site, and it's at first we don't think we're going to do these skills, and then we come out and they come up with these ideas that actually rival the audio guide in some ways.
Nice.
Very cool.
Yeah,
really cool.
So I have another question, I guess, to backtrack a little bit. Elisa had mentioned that you had received some input from the public on some of their priorities for what they felt were important about that site. And then also, did you find that as you were going through this program and talking to the public and developing all of this further and further, were the interests of the public in line with the priorities that you received in your directive initially?
That's a good question.
Yes, it's a very good question. I think our directive was quite open about what we had to include. It had to be sort of focused on World War I, but we were given kind of free range about what to do with it. The public feedback that we got was basically that they wanted a tiny bit more interaction with the landscape. They want it when the emotion was there, they wanted it to stay present and not disappear, and we had to take that on board and rewrite some of our script when that happened. But when we gave one of our final drafts to Amanda, she kind of replied saying that we had done more or less exactly what she'd wanted us to do, and that she could really feel the emotion. It was thought-provoking, and that she was actually engaging in the landscape in a way that she hadn't thought would have been possible.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's really cool.
It was quite impressive feedback, and we couldn't have done it without people telling us, actually, you need to do this. This works better. Could you include this? It was really, really, really useful, and I think it opened our eyes to how much of a bubble we get in when we're making the project.
Yeah.
And then suddenly someone comes and bursts that bubble and says, actually, you should do this. And it will make it 10 times better.
Okay.
That's super cool.
Yeah. What's the access to the site right now? Like who can actually get there and go see it? Is anyone?
Well, you can. It is mostly on private land. The remnants of the site itself, but it is accessible by a public road, basically. So you can walk along the edges of it and see some of the landmarks that we point out. But you can't actually go onto the site itself because it is on private property.
There are panels which are going to be installed, which will also help direct people around the landscape. And this is one of the feedback that we got. One of our test pilots told us that we had to have some sort of panels that would help them explain the site a tiny bit better. And so that's been quite useful as well, because we've been able to say, yes, we are going to have this there. And that's going to help draw people in, we hope, into actually wanting to explore the site as much as they can.
Yeah.
Without going on the private land. But you can see the terracing very well in certain places.
Yeah, there's definitely things that you can spot there that you can't necessarily go and touch, but you can see them well enough to know what they are once it's been explained to you.
Okay. All right. Well, in the last few minutes of the section here, or the segment, why don't we talk about your guys' process in starting this and learning the tools that it took to actually make this, and then, what you learned along the way.
Also, maybe I can start, because before this project, I had no experience in this kind of things. So now after a few weeks, I know much better. I know how to use the Photoshop or the program to edit the sound. So it's like great advantage of this project. And this project helped me not just to develop my digital skills, but also to improve my English, because I am an international student, so English is not my first language, and also to work out with my confidence.
Okay.
One of the things that I really learned was the importance of using browser-based digital programs. Like, we used Lucid Press to build our brochure, and that was extremely helpful because we weren't sharing a single PowerPoint or Photoshop document between all of us and making sure all of the changes were on the newest copy, but everyone could be working together on different computers, but on the same file at the same time, which saved us a lot of headache in the end, I think.
Nice. I've never heard of Lucid Press. That sounds interesting. Is that specifically for documents or for brochures and stuff like that?
It's for any kind of visual media, basically.
Okay.
There's we only used it for a brochure, so I wasn't able to explore the extent it could be used, but it was extremely, extremely promising for future projects.
Yeah. I think for me, my baby was the audio editing.
Mine too.
We were using Audacity, and during the recording of the audio guide, we were charging the laptop to the mains to make sure that the computer wouldn't die on us midway through recording, which means that the microphone that we were using picked up a hum. And because we didn't really want to go and re-record all of it again, we should have done, but we didn't really have the time nor the
we didn't have the time. We were on a very tight schedule. We didn't have the time for that.
And so I'd asked Wayne Brickcliffe from the e-learning centre at the University of York to kind of tell me what I should do to remove the hum, and he kind of told me, and I had a full day of trial and error of trying to remove the hum and making me sound like a robot at one point. And then
she's really downplaying her skills here. She did an amazing job of taking these files that were not necessarily at the same levels and not necessarily pitched properly and had external noises and all kinds of clicks and bumps and things, because I'm in software, I'm not in sound engineering. And she really cleaned up the files to the point where when you listen to them, you don't know any of the technical problems that we had during recording. Her skill set in this has grown tremendously.
It's been
Eliza's skill set in Photoshop has grown tremendously. Ashley has grown tremendously with her graphic design skills. The students, each of them took on basically an area of focus within the project. And though everyone learned all of the digital skills, they each seemed to find something that really spoke to them, and worked really well together as a team to use these skills in order to make the project the best it could be for everyone. And watching them over the course of several weeks come in from being very technologically scared the first day to being able to run circles around me as a digital archaeologist in some of these programs. It's been really great to watch, and I credit a lot of that to the fact that they had a deliverable product that they had to do, and that this wasn't a theoretical project. This was a
definitely
functional, you have this amount of time, get it done project. So we're very proud of them. I'm very proud of them.
Excellent. Chris, I think, were we talking about an audio engineer intern for the APN? I can't remember.
Yeah.
Nice. Yeah, the APN is...
Podcast.
that's fine with me. I think this one would be the most interesting to edit.
Nice. All right. Well, in the last couple of minutes here, is there anything that we haven't asked you that you guys want to mention about this project, like availability or anything like that?
Ooh, availability.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Where can people get it right now? Is it available right now for anybody to download?
It's not. It will be available to download in the next weeks to come.
Yeah.
Yes.
In the next week.
In the next week.
Yes.
And you will be able to get it from
hiddendale.wordpress.com.
And we will give you all of this for the show notes.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Cool.
Excellent.
Yep. You'll be able to get the audio guide, the brochure, and also read through all of our wonderful blog posts that documented our journey from the very, very first day of, oh, wow, this is what we're doing, to, hey, look at all we've learned.
Yeah.
Nice. It's nice to see that. Nice to see that process and see it come along. Yeah.
Yeah, and this is such an interesting program, and one of the things that I'm really fascinated by is that you've managed to take like multiple formats and multiple media and different sources, and how it seems to be a really good way to like democratize the process of like heritage site access.
Yeah.
You know, like you were talking about, you know, maybe some people don't have a smartphone, or maybe some people don't have good wireless coverage out there. So you've integrated different means of, you know, experiencing the site, but still having that like emotion and connection to the landscape.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
It's been amazing to hear from you all on this.
Thanks.
Thank you all for having us.
Yeah.
Yeah, no problem. So one final question for me is you know, as this school year winds to a close, do you have plans to do this again for another project, or to do something different related to the current project?
If I can do anything like this again, I think I'd be very, very happy.
Nice.
We're going to make sure that they have things to do.
Nice.
They're going to be busy. 'Cause
Yes.
they're on our radar now. So they're going to be just fine.
Well, the great thing about audio, especially, is, and once it gets on the internet, I mean, it'll literally never leave. Once Google gets their hands on it, it'll be on their server somewhere in California for the rest of eternity. And you know, it's that. And that's just a really
kind of terrifying.
well, that's just a really cool thing to think about. I used to think about that when I first got into archaeology, and even just my name on a tiny little site form for a trash scatter in Central Nevada. I'm like, okay, that's, you know, people kind of play that down, but that's a legacy, you know, that you can
really
have.
is.
So even if you got out of archaeology in the future and did something else, that will always be there, you know, always something you can look back on. So, okay, well, thanks a lot. And we'll talk offline about getting this on the APN possibly, and just another place for you guys to have it stored and for people to access it. And if you guys do anything else in the future you want to come on and talk about, be sure to let us know.
Thank you
Absolutely.
so much.
Thank
Thank you
you.
guys so much.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, thanks a lot. Women in Archaeology is a show about archaeology by the women of archaeology. An alternating panel of women archaeologists discuss the issues in archaeology that impact professionals and the public every day. Check out Women in Archaeology for a different perspective on the past today at www.archaeologypodcastnetwork.com/WIA. Now let's get back to the show. All right, we're back for our app of the periodic time period segment, and one of these days. So anyway, I think we're gonna have to hire a company that will have to form a committee to figure out what we're gonna call this segment. That's what my determination is.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So one of the things we're going to talk about, what I'm going to talk about is an app for playing podcasts. It's called Downcast. Now, if you're listening to this and you're on Archaeotech, the feedback I've received says that you're probably using some sort of podcast player to listen to this, whether it's Google Play or it's Apple iTunes podcast player, or you can actually be just on the Squarespace website on your mobile device listening to this as well. It also works that way. But one of the things I do, I listen to a lot of podcasts, not just APN podcasts. So years ago, I started using an app called Downcast. And first off, let me get into some of the specifics. It's not a free app. It's anywhere from, I think, $2 or $3.99 up to $7.99 for the Mac desktop version. And the thing I like about it is, first off, it plays on all my devices. Now, of course, I'm an Apple fanboy, and it plays. There's an Apple Watch controller, there's an iPhone version, an iPad version, and like I said, a Mac desktop version. And one of the ways you can use this is you can link all these things to your iCloud account. So if you, say, are listening to a podcast on your phone and you're in your car and you're on the way home, and then you get home and you go over to your computer and you want to keep going, you can just turn on the Downcast app on your computer and pick up where you left off. Or, then you're done with your computer and you want to go sit somewhere else and you want to continue listening to your podcast or watching your video podcast, you can pick it up on your iPad or something like that and continue on and just right where you left off and just keep on going with it. So that's pretty cool. Two of the other huge features that I use of Downcast, which any good podcast player will have. So I'm not necessarily advocating for Downcast. I'm just advocating for something that's a dedicated podcast player, because it will come with all these features. But one of the things you can do, let's start with this. We'll start with four major points here. First is search. It will search all podcasts everywhere. If it has an RSS feed, and any podcast does, then it will find it in its search. It's pretty good about that. And that's video and audio podcasts. One of the things I don't like is you can't filter the results. Like if you're specifically looking for a video podcast or an audio podcast, you got to look for the little symbol they put up there for whether or not it's video or audio. I wish you could filter the searches a little better, but you can't. And then you can subscribe right in there, and it'll automatically download the most recent episode. And you can go in on the app and download previous episodes if you want like their whole catalog or something. So there's that. So there's search and then subscription. Pretty easy right there. And then the other big thing I like about this is the ability to create playlists. So I'll talk about one of the ways I use Downcast here in a minute, which will sort of illustrate how I use it. But on my phone, I listen to audio podcasts on it. I don't have any video podcasts on my phone. But on my phone, I've got all these playlists. I've got the default playlist, which is all audio, and that's everything that downloads in my feed. And currently, just so you know, there's 274 episodes, a total of 201 hours and 25 minutes of podcasting I'm behind on. So,
whoa.
Yeah, which leads me into one of the other features later on. But so the playlists I've got, and they're not very good, well-titled playlists, but one of them is called Science. It's just general science shows. One of them is called Self-Improvement, and I've got actually some, if you listen to Art of Charm or things like that, I've got those in there. One of them is business. I've got Entrepreneur on Fire and a nonprofit business model one, and one on podcasting and things like that. Then I've got a news playlist. There's a few skeptical podcasts I listen to, like what is it? Skeptic's Guide to the Universe is a really good one. I listen to that. It's in my skepticism playlist. And then I've got, of course, my archaeology playlist. So what I do when I listen to podcasts, I don't generally listen to them all at once. I do listen to them chronologically, but within their playlist. So the first thing I listen to is archaeology, because generally it's an APN podcast and I'm just doing quality control. And then I go to the news one, and then I go to business, and then self-improvement, and then generally science, on down the line like that. So yeah, I love the ability to create playlists. Now, one of the ways that I keep up on my podcasts, or try to anyway, is I listen to them at 2 times their normal speed. When I'm in the car, when I've got headphones on. Yeah.
So you're doing chipmunk style podcasting.
Well, it doesn't do chipmunk style. Really, it's actually really clever about it. Even when a podcast plays music, it does really well at it. It just removes, there's a formula for If there's silence, it definitely removes that, like pauses between words and stuff, which are longer than people think. And if there's long audio stretches that are similar, it will actually remove little bits from those too, and just squish everything together. Yeah. So, well, it's actually good. I've never had a problem with it. I've been listening to this podcast on 2X for at least 3 or 4 years now, and my wife thought I was insane when I started doing that, and now she does it too. So, it's actually. I wouldn't even say if you have the time and you only listen to one podcast, I mean, why the heck, just listen to it on 2X. You realize that your brain is a very malleable and plastic device, and it will figure it out, right?
Man.
I mean, your brain is just really good at that. Now, the one thing I've tried to do that I can't do is listen to them on 3X. That is just, I don't know how much practice you need for that, but I just can't do it. And one of the other things, too, is if they've got like a really thick accent or something like that, I also have to slow it down a little bit. I'll go down to like 1.5 or 1.25. I'll never go down to 1, but I'll go down, a little bit if they've got a really strong accent, because I just can't understand them. But and that's more of a language thing. I'm sure if I lived in that country, I could, I could understand them at 2X, but most of the time I just can't. So yeah, that's what I love about that. And so one of the ways I really use Downcast, like I said, I have my audio stuff on my iPhone. On my iPad, I've got all my video podcasts because the iPad is a little more conducive to watching video. And so I subscribe to a lot of podcasts. I have all the playlists and everything too, but they're all mostly tech podcasts on video because there aren't really any archaeology video podcasts. There's Soupcast, but yet, exactly. We'll work on that. There's the Archeo Soup Productions. He's mostly on YouTube, but as far as on my iPad, it's mostly tech stuff. CNET and Geekbeat TV and Geeks Life and TED Talks on there and some news things and some other stuff. So, but I've got those organized into playlists as well, and it's just they just do a really good job at it. And on the iPad, you can actually, while the video's playing, you can hit the home button and escape out of it, and then it turns it into the little picture-in-picture thing. So you can watch your video podcast, and you can do those at 1.5, 2X as well if you want to. And then you can surf and do other things on your iPad while you have the video playing in the corner. So it's pretty great. If you don't use a podcasting application, I would suggest that you do, just for organization purposes. Unless you listen to the only show you listen to every week is Archaeotech, then do whatever you want. But if you're listening to this, I assume you listen to at least one podcast. But yeah, and I've heard, if you're in the Apple universe, the Apple podcasting app was super bad when it first came out. It was actually the first thing I ever used, and then they revamped it with iOS 7, I want to say, and it was terrible. Everybody jumped ship on iOS 7. I think that's probably when I jumped ship. But now, from what I hear, it's been redone, and it's better. So if you don't want to pay the money, I would give the Apple Podcast app another shot if you haven't before, or even if you have before, just try it again, because I hear it does a lot of good things now. I really love Downcast, so I'm not going to switch from that. Besides, I'd have to go resubscribe to the 40 podcasts I've subscribed to, and I don't really want to do that either. So, but I guess the other advantage to the Apple one too is if you have Apple TV, again, another item in the Apple universe, you can also pick up your podcasts on that. So, but I'm sure there are other third-party podcast apps that will play on Apple TV. Downcast doesn't currently, but I'm sure they're working on it. So
yeah. I use the Apple Podcast app on my phone, especially when I'm on like long road trips and stuff. But mostly only because I didn't up until like just now. I didn't know any different. So that 2X feature, I can see that really being like my new favorite thing. So I'm gonna probably jump and go to Downcast, just because that's really the biggest thing holding me back from listening to more podcasts is I don't have the attention span for that. So I need to speed it up a little.
Well, the one thing I noticed too, if you're going to go to 2X, so two things. One, it's going to take you a little while to get used to it. So if it's a podcast you really want to listen to, you might have to listen to it twice, just so you can absorb everything and kind of get used to the 2X factor. Yeah. Also, I find that when I'm in my car and I don't have my headphones on, I have to turn it up quite a bit louder when it's on 2X, just because it pounds into your brain a little harder. You know what I mean? I don't know what it is, but I have to have it a little bit louder when it's on 2X, especially if there might be an accent issue. Yeah. And then it helps me it helps me listen to it. All right. Well, so that's that. Go leave a comment down for this episode wherever you heard it, and let us know what podcasting application you use, because I'm always interested in trying something new, and I'm always interested to hear what other people use and to see how well it works. So I'll mention just one other thing about Downcast is it does the show notes really well. So we always have decent show notes for our podcast with links and everything. And Downcast has an embedded browser. So if you click on a link on our show notes within Downcast, it'll actually stay in Downcast, keep playing the podcast, and then take you to that link that's in there. So like while you're listening to the show right now, there's a link to whatever in our show notes. You can click on that if you're using Downcast, and it will stay in Downcast and show you what we're talking about. So it's pretty handy.
Nice.
All right. So let's move on over to your app, Chris, which is somewhat linked to this, but then again not.
Yeah. So the app I've got for this lunar cycle is Soon. And what was the tagline they said? It's like what everything you and your friends are doing.
Yeah, what you and your friends are doing next. Yeah.
Anyway, like most of our apps, this one's only available on the iOS. So I'm sorry, Android listeners. I failed you again. But I like it. I had a coworker at the bar actually tell me about this, and as he was explaining how much he loves it and what he uses it for, I immediately started to think, hey, I could use this for any sort of thing tangentially related to archaeology. And so it's like a reminder or like bucket list or to-do list, and it's got all of these added features. Like it pulls so much metadata from whatever you search. So you can choose from, like, the ones that it really promotes heavily are like movies, TV series, books, and then like restaurants and bars and clubs and stuff. But you can also look up podcasts. And so like I was able to add The Art of Charm. And when you go in and add The Art of Charm to your list, you can like pull it up, and it has a list of all of the episodes, like chronologically, leaving like the most recent one at the top, and you can play it straight out of the app. I haven't tried to listen to it yet, but I think that's a really neat thing. Now, when I went to go and add Archaeotech or Go Dig a Hole, it can find them in the list of podcasts available. I'm assuming it's just pulling from the iTunes store, but for some reason it can't add Archaeotech or Go Dig a Hole to my little reminder list, and I'm wondering if that's Chris and I were talking earlier before we started recording, and we think it's something to do with the metadata available in the Squarespace platform that we host our shows on. So it might not be a limitation of the app itself, maybe just what we're doing. But anyway, I think that's really neat because, for instances like when I'm hanging out with Webby, he'll tell me about a podcast I need to listen to, and if I have cell signal or Wi-Fi, I can just pull up in Soon and go ahead and like put it into my to-do list, and that way I can not only remember it but also link to it and just go straight to it. Other than that, like when my coworker was initially telling me about this, I was like, oh well, I just use the Reminders app. When someone tells me like a restaurant or a book or something, I just put it into the Reminders app. And he goes, no, like you can actually like do something with it. So like this movie, I can look up a movie or a restaurant and it'll show me like movie times, or like the restaurant, it'll show you not only the location, and you can also order an Uber to take you to or from the restaurant. So that's kind of neat. And also, like, I was looking up some books that some people had told me that I needed to check out, and it'll show you like the ISBN number, so you can take that to like a library or
Nice.
go straight onto Amazon, stuff like that. And you can share all of these items too. So like if I wanted to remind Webby to look up a book or something, I could just go ahead and send it to him. So I don't know. This is my first day of actually using it, and I've already added a ton of stuff. And like you can look up various cities and stuff. So like for us going to the SAAs in Vancouver next year, like I'm sure people are going to be telling us, like, oh, you got to go to this restaurant, this bar, blah blah blah. you got to check out this museum. And so like you can add all of those things and even order an Uber from your conference hotel or wherever you happen to be. So I like it's more than just like a reminder list, you know. I like that it has a few extra features to make it actually like easier to get things done off of your little to-do list.
Nice. Yeah, that's really cool. It's like a media to-do list. It's really
Yeah.
Yeah, it's really neat. And just so everybody knows, there is something weird going on with this Squarespace. It has to be Squarespace because I was just playing with this thing and I was able to add the CRM Archaeology podcast, which is the only show that I don't host on Squarespace. I host it on Libsyn and I just ported over to Squarespace. So, and then I went and tried the Archaeologist podcast, Tristan Boyle's podcast, our co-founder. And he also doesn't host his on our website solely. The iTunes feed actually comes from his own website, as well as the History of Caribbean and 100 Objects, a new podcast we started syndicating. All three of those are syndicated off of our Squarespace site, or hosted off of our Squarespace site, and all of them were able to add to the list. So, yeah. So there is something weird with the way the metadata is happening within Squarespace. I'm not sure what's causing that. Might be something I can look into. Might not be anything I can do about it. So I know you can add code to the to each post, like in the background, that might help this to work, and I'll look into that. Especially if people comment and want to start using this app for that, then it'll definitely prompt me to do that. But anyway, yeah, looks really cool, and this one's free too. It looks like. I don't know how they make any money.
Yeah, who knows?
Yeah, because I don't see any. Just surfing around in here real quick, I don't see any ads or anything in here, so not really sure.
No, the only thing that had me wondering about that is like there's got to be some kind of product placement here and there. Like there's definitely certain movies at the top of the list when you're going to add movies, and also the whole thing with ordering Uber versus, you know, Lyft or any other thing. You know, there's got to be some cash changing hands there.
Yeah, and it's social as well, because since I just signed up, I signed up using Facebook. You can sign up using your email, but I signed up using Facebook. And under my activity feed, I can see all the things Mr. Christopher Sims has added. So he wants to go to REI. He wants to go to... so I've got lots of things on here.
Pittsburgh, I'm going to REI.
Nice. Oh, that's dirty. No, so anyway.
Hey.
So yeah, check it out. Let us know what you think, and also if you guys ever have any suggestions for apps that you're using in the field, or apps that you're you're really interested in and you think other people could use, or just for your everyday life even. So let us know, and we'll review it and talk about it on the podcast. So. All right, I think that's it for this show. Come back next week when hopefully we'll have a discussion with Michael Ashley about Codify and the Codify World Tour that we should be currently on when you're hearing this next time. This podcast that you're hearing now was supposed to be with him, but when you get stuck on a layover in Germany with bronchitis, they don't let you on an airplane. So that's where you stay. Anyway, more on that later, and we'll see you next time. Thanks. That's it for another episode of the Archaeotech Podcast. Links to some of the items mentioned on the show are in the show notes for this podcast, which can be found at www.archaeologypodcastnetwork.com/archaeotech. If you like the show and want to comment, please do. You can leave comments about this or any other episode on the website or on the iTunes page for this episode. You can also email us at chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com or use the contact form on the podcast webpage. If you'd like us to answer a question on a future episode, email us. Use the contact form on the website or tweet your questions with the hashtag Archaeotech or tag @ArchPodNet in your tweet. Please share the link to this show wherever you saw it. If you'd like to subscribe to this podcast, you can do so on iTunes or on Stitcher Radio. You can also type the name of the podcast into your favorite podcasting app and subscribe that way. Don't forget to go over to iTunes and leave a review of the show. It helps us get noticed so more people can find our podcast and benefit from the content. Also, send us show suggestions and interview suggestions. We want this to be a resource for field technicians everywhere, and we want to know what you want to know about. This show is produced by Chris Webster and Tristan Boyle, and was edited by Chris Webster.
This has been a presentation of the Archaeology Podcast Network. Visit us on the web for show notes and other podcasts at www.archaeologypodcastnetwork.com. Contact us at chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com.
Thanks again for listening to this episode and for supporting the Archaeology Podcast Network. If you want these shows to keep going, consider becoming a member for just $7.99 US a month. That's cheaper than a venti quad eggnog latte. Go to arcpodnet.com/members for more info.